Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us for our first interview in 2021, and what a year it's already been. Still remaining very hopeful and excited about the opportunities to come, and really excited to have our first guest of the year, Mark Magaña, who is the founding president and CEO of the national nonprofit called GreenLatinos, which is a national network of Latino environmental and conservation advocates. And he's also a wonderful long-term board member for the Children's Environmental Health Network. So it's always an honor to learn from and speak with you, Mark. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Nse. Thanks for inviting me on the show. I really appreciate it and look forward to having this conversation with you.
Yes.
It's been great to be on your board, and it's been even better to be longtime friends.
Yes. Thank you. I was actually remembering when I was getting ready for this interview. Do you remember our little conversation, our first little lunch there at Union Station, which looked much different? Union Station has changed a bit, just trying to feel us both out and make sure it was a good fit. And it's been really wonderful. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the board and learn from you and work side by side now in some ways as well. So,
Yeah, I remember that was the first time meeting you. And so it was for me, having young children, being in the environmental movement, and finding ways to combine both of those under your leadership has been great. So thank you for the
of
opportunity.
course, of course. All right, so let's jump in. I think it would be really great, Mark, for our audience to get a sense, a little flavor of your personal journey. I know I've heard your story a few times. I think it's very captivating, but you've been on a journey that's, I think, a little unique to then end up as a national NGO leader, especially with a strong advocate background. And I remember when I first met you, you weren't married yet, and you didn't have those beautiful kids yet. Again, so even these personal milestones. But how have you kind of gotten on this journey, this passionate journey that you are on to protect our environment and public health?
Well, how long is the show?
Take as long as you want.
You got the virtual hook ready? Um, Thanks for asking that question. And I always think it's for when I talk to people, when I meet with people, even to get to know who they really are before you get down to the bones of the business. You have to understand where people come from, the shoes that they've walked in, their life experiences. It really helps to know their perspective and where they're coming from. So for me, I'm Mexican American. My grandparents immigrated from Mexico in the 1920s. My parents were born in Chicago. I was born in Chicago. And so I was raised in Los Angeles and came out to DC in 1990 to work for the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, NALEO. And so I was coming to DC to do national civil rights work, and we did a lot of immigration work, Latino contracting, education, bilingual education, a lot of the issues that we're still working on now, and and voting rights that we're still trying to improve on now. For me, the experience was amazing. First coming to DC, having a job, and being able to learn the ropes from a nonprofit's viewpoint that I really admired. The president was a guy named Harry Pachon, who had really taken me under his wing ever since I'd been in college. I wanted to get more experience, so I worked on the Hill after that. I worked for Congressman Jim McDermott from Seattle, Washington, and worked on the Ways and Means Committee and doing healthcare and welfare reform. And this was early in the Bill Clinton presidency. And then Newt Gingrich took over the House, and we lost the House. And so I went over and did HHS, Health and Human Services, as a political appointee doing their legislative affairs. At that point, President Clinton, after vetoing the first two welfare bills, signed the third one. And it essentially made legal immigrants ineligible for benefits as part of that bill. And it was a political calculation of his, but it's something I couldn't enforce and couldn't work on. So I left Department of Health and Human Services and went over to lobby for the city of Los Angeles in DC, thinking that would be my transition job to go back home. We were trying to help build the metro system and get massive amounts of federal funding to do that. Unfortunately, or fortunately, at that point, then Congressman Bob Menendez became the first Latino elected to House leadership. And it was an opportunity that I had to work for him as a senior floor advisor, policy advisor. And I couldn't pass it up. So that, like other things in my future, pushed back moving out of DC and moving home, these opportunities that we have. After that, I did my last 2 years in the Clinton White House as special assistant to President Clinton for legislative affairs, working on the House side. An amazing experience of learning how, continuing to learn how Congress works and how you do high-level negotiation and how you are able to work in the administration and represent the administration in Congress. After that, the Biden election got stolen from us, I believe, and we still had to, my efforts turned to consulting and doing some lobbying, mostly tech and healthcare. But I also did some advocacy work for national Latino organizations. And it wasn't until 2007, 2008 that I got reached out to in the middle of the cap and trade debate, which was the last big effort to do a large scale climate change bill in 2007 to 2009. That I got reached out to see if I could help get more Latino support for this cap and trade bill. And what I learned from that, one of the biggest things I learned from that was that Latino environmental and conservation advocates did not have a hub, a home where they met, where they came together, had a sense of familia, and that many of them were very isolated and siloed in their organizations and didn't know any other Latinos that were working in the area and didn't, or that worked in their organization. And so one of the things that I thought really could help move this, the increase the power of the voice of the Latino community and our power professionally and our power to be able to help our communities, was to create that type of organization, which is what GreenLatinos is, a national network of Latino environmental and conservation advocates. And so I was motivated by that need, but also that same year that we created GreenLatinos, my first child was born, and my mom passed from leukemia, most closely associated with industrial pollutants like benzene. And so honoring my mother and knowing that the biggest problems that my daughter and now son are going to be facing are going to be climate change caused, pandemics, heat, natural disasters, climate-related natural disasters, etc. So I thought I want to do this full time, and so that's how we started GreenLatinos in 2013, and we've been going strong ever since, making sure that national Latino advocates have a home, that we're supported, that we support each other, and that we have the resources and the access and the ability to help our communities, and that our voice is heard on a federal scale.
No, that whole story is just so powerful, the journey, and I know you're nowhere close to, there's just so much still more to do, and it's so exciting to see the collaborative spirit that GreenLatinos has been able to foster and leverage, so it's awesome to have that leadership. Speaking a little bit more about your two beautiful children, I know you've also talked in public a lot and in private about even the transformation I think just naturally happens when you become a parent, in your case, a father, the protector. Can you talk a little bit about what becoming a father has been, especially in light of what you've also just mentioned as far as the world that these, the children are going to be taking on and absorbing and living in? How has that added extra motivations for you?
Oh, it's been everything. Before children were born, I think I treated this issue, and as a client. It was one of my clients. It was, and it was, what can I do to dedicate my time, my abilities, my privileges that I've been given, to be able to fight for their future. I believe that we are facing increasing threats from climate change and from environmental degradation in our communities. We already have significant threats to our health and livelihoods when it comes to natural disasters, when it comes to cardiopulmonary diseases, asthma, killing our children, and the fact that COVID took such a hard hit on those on the front lines because they were exposed to fine particulate matter that already damaged their lungs, which caused them to be more susceptible to the worst of the COVID-19. These kinds of things are going to be continuing happening. My confidence level is that we can come together as a community, and all of our communities, the frontline communities, to really stop the degradation of our environment, of our communities, and the globe. And I think it's the children and the youth right now who are leading the way, but it's the children and their future. I think in my next 20, 30, 40 years, si Dios quiere, I think, things will get worse, but I'll be able to survive, whatever I need to be able to survive. But I think in the 20, 30 year, 40 year time frame, without taking on the significant systemic changes that we need to take on, it could get very ugly out there. And so I don't want that for my children's future, and no parent wants that for their children's future. And so we know that we have to stand up and push back on corporate polluter interests who are going to be influencing elected officials to do otherwise, to take a slow approach. But we don't have time for a slow approach. And our children don't have time for a slow approach, and they know that. And so if we don't support them, if we don't get behind them, if we don't use all our resources and access to fight for them, then it's just as if we're not getting them educated, or not making sure that they have their vaccinations, or we are not taking care of their future if we're not making sure that we take care of climate change.
Very well said. Thank you for that. Behind you is a beautiful picture of Cesar Chavez, and I know sitting behind our new president, Biden, on his table behind the Oval desk there is also a statue of Cesar Chavez, and a picture of Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and many other very influential leaders. And it's my understanding he wants to constantly be reminded every day about the trailblazers before him, those that have, in many cases risked their lives for this country and for justice. And he, I think, understands well into his, the age of his life now and his journey. He's also coming into very unprecedented times, he and Vice President Harris. With all that we have on top of COVID, this unprecedented public health disaster that never should have gotten the way it's gotten, that's a whole nother subject, with the injustice issues bubbling, they've always been there, but really rising to the top. And of course, all the atrocities that we've seen play out at our nation's capital and in other places throughout this country on any given day, right? How might you suggest that many of us in the advocate community prioritize the many needs? Because one thing we've heard from a lot of these transition team meetings, and even some of the meetings we've had with the new climate czar, and they need our help. They recognize this administration understands this has to be done with the help of advocate groups, community groups, the public citizens, but we also all know we can't all do all things well, right? So any guidance you might have in helping us, or how you're even thinking of navigating just the climate world or even beyond with all that the average family has upon them these days.
Well, you mentioned Cesar Chavez, and Cesar Chavez Day is March 31st, and one of Cesar Chavez's last large-scale efforts was his last hunger strike. And that the impetus behind that hunger strike was that his farm workers, UFW farm workers, United Farm Workers, were being poisoned by pesticides and hospitalized and dying, and there were no protections. And so he initiated the hunger strike to fight for that, to fight for his members' environment. And the environment, now we know, the environment that we live in, the fruits that we eat, the vegetables that we eat, the toxic pesticides that are on them. There was a time when organic food was just called food. We didn't use these pesticides. We didn't use these organophosphates, these horrible things that are causing damage not to us, but to our future generations. A lot of our board members could talk a lot more about that scientifically than I can. And so I enjoy hearing that and learning from them. When we sit at our kitchen table, we've got a lot of things to worry about right now. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to decrease. I think that we will have a significant amount of burden to bear. I would have to say that we in the United States, for a large segment of our population that aren't in poverty or in sickness constantly, have been very fortunate to not have the same day in and day out struggles and worries that the rest of the world has, and many of our communities in the United States have. So right now, for many of us, we're just getting a glimpse of what it's like to live in the rest of the world, to live in poverty, to live in sickness, to live in fear every day. We need to be able to understand that now more than ever is the time for us to make sure we expend our energy not on Twitter, not on social media, not watching The Bachelor, but making sure that our voice is heard on these issues of the day that we can have a significant impact on and make things better for our community, for other communities. And so if we're able to focus on justice and equity and our ability to bring that broadly through systemic change, broad systemic changes, then we can achieve the policy changes that we want in housing, in education, in income levels, in the environment. And that all these things can come together to really be, to help achieve things like the Green New Deal hope for, which is broad scale equity and systemic change that can bring about environmental healing and solve the climate crisis, and do it in a time frame that's auspicious, but is doable, and we must.
Yeah, thank you. On the climate change front specifically, since we both know how vital it is and how it very much interlays into all the other important environmental health issues, air, water, agricultural, food, and even, consumer products, by how these things are made, all the plastics, for example, that are also causing major detriment to our environment. And let's not forget the huge opportunity the plastic industry has taken. Let's just be frank, right? With all the detriment, all the loss, the millions of people that are dealing with all of this ridiculous, side effects and loss of life during the COVID pandemic. And we know we're nowhere close to out of it yet. And here we have industries that are taking full advantage and making everything and as many plastic bottles as possible and all the like. So with that said, in the climate arena, even more drilling further, are there any specific strategies that you've seen at the community level that you feel are worthy of, I know you have, but are there any that you want to lift up that while we are working towards the Green New Deal and other very important monumental federal strategies, state strategies, what might some advocate groups like ourselves be continuing to leverage and encourage funders to be looking at supporting and leveraging as far as what seems to be going right in communities? If there's any examples you want to give for climate remediation and
we need to make sure that we are resourcing and funding local community efforts, campaigns. They are surviving on pennies on the dollar and still succeeding with their grassroots organizing in ways where, for us, with millions of dollars in doing federal work in the last 4 years, have just been playing defense. I'm not saying playing defense wasn't important. It was. We were able to hold the line on many environmental issues. But if with a little bit more, maybe dimes on the dollar, 10%, 20%, 30% of the money we spent playing defense, local communities could have been winning significant campaign wins in their communities. And what they fight for is they fight for their children's health. And they fight for disparate impacts of pollution and placement of polluting industries in their communities, inequities. And so you can't go into a community and present them with the global carbon dioxide emissions and SOx and NOx emissions, and their issues that they're having to face with is the smokestack in their backyard, is the petrochemical facility that they can touch from their fence line, is the lead poisoning that the battery recycling plant left in their soil and in their air and in their children's brains, that the water that got full of lead. In places like Michigan and other places, it's not an isolated incident. So when you want to go to a community and talk to a community, you need to find out what their issues are. What's affecting them? Is it clean air? Is it clean water? What's going to motivate them? How is what is happening affecting their children's health? How is what been on purpose and placed directly in their communities on purpose? And these inequities in their child's future and their children's health motivate people because they want better future for their children.
Thank you for that, Mark, because so much important guidance in what you just mentioned, especially listening to communities, listening to where they are, and burns me up making assumptions, and especially making negative assumptions. Oh, this community is too fill in the blank. They're too overburdened. They don't have the time. They don't care about these issues. Your points and my experiences for sure resonate in that. So the opposite. The communities we're talking about have been overstressed and overburdened for decades. It's not okay. They've kind of found a way in this cyclical trauma to navigate and find a way, and we have to do better. But it certainly doesn't mean that any entity, group, federal government, state government should assume what a community is willing to do or not do just by virtue of what position you think they're in. So thank you for those very important points. I hope everyone's listening, because it really doesn't matter what the said advocate's aim is. The methods and the approach pretty much are the same. You must listen to, involve, and actually protect the communities that you say you're trying to protect. All right. When we talk about policies, which I know you're also a big part of, you mentioned the Green New Deal and any aspects of that. What are some other priority policies that you believe are coming along that GreenLatinos is working on, or you yourself are going to be keeping close tabs on?
The biggest would be Congressman Grijalva's Environmental Justice for All Act. I mean, it's a cornerstone act that puts together the issues that we have in our communities and how federally we can make sure that the law, regulations, the justice system is able to serve these and defend these communities. Right now, it's piecemeal, and we're hampered by judicial decisions. We're hampered by incomplete laws and regulations that don't take into account the impact of toxics and pesticides and particulate matter pollution and water, issues on our communities. And so being able to look at things and how they affect communities as a whole, and be able to have the legal recourse, be able to have the regulatory recourse, to have our voices here heard and protected and responded to is so important. The Green New Deal and other packages that are like the Green New Deal are ones that take our communities as a whole and the needs that we have as a whole, not just our need to be educated, our need to live in a home it's safe, and to be able to access the economic opportunities that other communities used to. And so these things, these packages, like the two I mentioned, are going to be very important for people to get behind. Nothing's perfect for everybody. People can find reasons they shouldn't, or it's not optimal. But if we don't think about these as opportunities to have our voices heard on the priorities that we have, and opportunities for us to come together to be able to fight for these, to be able to fight for legislation that moves clean transportation, the Moving Forward Act, to move opportunities to fix the Voting Rights Act, to be able to fix campaign finance reform that's corrupting our system, as HR 1 is hopefully, as reintroduced, is going to be doing, if we can move that. Many of these things put together, and including our efforts that we're going to have, legislative efforts to fight climate change, whether they'll come together as one omnibus climate change bill or bits and pieces in other bills, is to be seen. But these efforts are all very important for us to be able to get behind and have our voices heard, that we're in this together.
Yeah, thank you. We certainly are not going to be bored. This is the time we've all been waiting for, to finally, like you said, not only play defense, which we will always still do, but definitely be much more on the offense. Looking forward to that. Again, I've been mentioning COVID a lot. It is the backdrop, and our world has changed as we've known it, right? At least the last year, almost year. How has this pandemic, it has highlighted so much of the underbelly of this country, things that were just not created overnight. The problems with our schools, ventilation systems, and injustices in various communities, frontline communities that are now essential workers, which have no choice to stay home. They have to go out and interact with whoever they're coming in contact with, and many of them have lost their lives as a result, and on and on. How has the pandemic, living through the pandemic, you also moved during the pandemic, how has it impacted you and the work that you're trying to uplift this year?
I've been, like I said before, our family has been extremely fortunate to have things that many people have lost: jobs, family members, their health, their security, things that many people assumed would always be with them. In the last year, have shown how fragile our health, our lives, our economic system can be. So for me, the most significant impacts for our family have been the isolation, which has positive and negative effects. But I'm not flying anywhere. I'm at home with the kids, with the family. We've become a lot closer. Have spent a lot more time together. It's been, in that way, on the side, something that has fed much more into this year and our memories of this year. But we've also lost extended family members and friends. We can't see them. And even, end of life, you can't see them. I want to see that we come out of this stronger, that we come out of this more with more ambition to take care of the balance of our environment and how we live and how we treat each other. I think it's going to be important that people that they don't just get their vaccination shot and leave this all behind, that they remember and that know that the systems that led to this, the environmental imbalance that led to this still exists, and that if we don't take this seriously and live in more balance and less waste, and that this and other pandemics will be coming more frequently, and that we really can come together and have just a beautiful world and a beautiful balance, and following the lives of indigenous communities and others that have much more natural respect and symbiotic relationship with the land and the water. We don't need to be a consumer-oriented, wasteful world that is just degrading our community, degrading our globe. And so I hope we come out of this knowing we've got to appreciate what we have. We have to hold our family close, but we also have to make sure we have a much symbiotic relationship with the world and the nature that we live in, so that it's a much more healthy relationship as well.
Excellent points. We must remember, right, in order for us to not become so desensitized that we lose whatever passions we are having. And with that said, there are a lot of folks coming behind us who, like you said, are leading movements. And then there are many that are quite dismayed right now. They have energy, they have passions, they're so frustrated, like you said, with the voting process and how things are going, and set of divisions in this country, and even how this pandemic has been handled and how some have chosen to handle it and not protect them and not protect perfect strangers. What advice do you have for the folks coming behind who are a bit dismayed right now, maybe are seeing the imbalances and certainly are looking at their future in this world, and the fragmentation of our climate and all that, and trying to make a way? What suggestions might you be for helping us kind of hone in that energy and that passion and not lose them, but rather attract them into activism?
Now, we are living in what I call a documentary moment. We've seen documentaries about the movement to end slavery, abolition, the movement to gain women's right to vote, the movement for farm that I mentioned, and we've often thought to ourselves, what would I in that era around then? Would I be on the line? Would I be on the bus? Would I be on the bridge? Would I take the hose? Would I face the dog? And what we're seeing now is that people who are facing these issues modern day that we're facing right now, that together, racial injustice, is that leaders like Black Lives Movement are saying, no more. We're going to stand up. We're not just going to for 1 hour. We're not going to stand up for 1 day. We're going to stand up for weeks and months and years, and we're not going away. And we're going to make sure that our voices are heard, that we come together in community, that we come together in love and in joy, that we bring about gatherings that people want to be at, non-violent, progressive activation that benefit all communities. And so the lead of them, the lead of youth, when it comes to issue like guns that they're leading, climate change that they're leading, when it comes to issues that we've seen that have movements that have been effective, LGBTQ rights, marijuana legalization, these things that didn't seem doable 10 years ago became doable because communities came together. And so the optimistic thing is that we can make the changes that may seem like they're impossible to make by just changing people's minds and getting out there and making sure that we fight for each other together, nonviolent, community-based, frontline-led. It can be changed with a small minority of people can have the power to change governments, to change our futures. And so if we don't come together and do what is necessary to make the change for our future, we won't have the choice to do that in 10 years. So I am very optimistic about our capability. I just hope that people understand the timeline that we're on. But history and said it's been done before, and we can do it again. And so I feel like an ancient, attributed to an ancient Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times, which can be ironic at times. I do believe that we are faced with interesting times. And so if we don't take this opportunity to fight for our children, to fight for our future, to come together, support each other in love, joy, but the opportunity that we have to make amazing changes. And we are right at a precipice where we have this opportunity. Then it's an opportunity lost, and it's not of no small consequence.
Again, well said, Mark. Thank you. As we're rounding out here, what can listeners be doing to help Green Latinos and the many wonderful ways that you are helping to contribute to a variety of these problems that you're working on each and every day?
Yeah, find out what moves you, what moves your family, what moves your community, what's affecting your community, and see what organizations are doing that work. And if you can invest some of your time, go to a meeting, go to an online webinar, support with a few dollars, talk to your friends, your neighbors. Change is made when neighbors talk to neighbors, when comadres talk to comadres, when mothers think for each other. And so make your needs, your wants, your community's desires known. You have a voice. Things aren't hopeless. You can change. We've seen this election. In Georgia, where a couple weeks ago it didn't seem like this runoff, there's a chance that we could win both of these runoff seats, and that we get two Democrats that will hopefully fight for helping the climate crisis, end the climate crisis, and other important issues of our time. But they said, we can do this. We can come together, get out the vote, get communities that had in centuries to be able to say, this is important for me, this is important for my children, this is important for my community, and make it relatable. So what we do now to be able to relate what my needs are, what my family's needs are, what my community's needs are, and make sure that we don't waste this time that we have, but instead find our cause, find our movement, and be part of it. And if that is Latino environmental and conservation advocacy, then join us at greenlatinos.org. We want to work with you. We want to support your work. We want to support your community. And also we want to be able to come together to be able to support large scale federal changes. But be part of that's more important now than before.
Such powerful words, so many great teachings, life lessons. Again, it's such an honor to work with and know you and have you as a friend, Mark. So appreciate your time, and please thank your beautiful family for the time you spent with us today. But this is really great, and I know that the many lessons you've shared in this last 45 minutes or so will be so meaningful to many. So really appreciate the time. Thank you.
See you, Nse, as always. Great to have this conversation, and give my best to your family as well.
Of course. Be well.